College can be an interesting time in someone's life for many reasons, but even when it comes to your money. Robert Brown is on the show today to discuss the unique challenges young people face, from debt to savings to keeping your spending under control, and how all this helps young adults get through school on the right track with their finances. Welcome to the MapleMoney Show, the podcast that helps Canadians improve their personal finances to create lasting financial freedom. Smart Savings by our sponsor Wealthsimple is a better way to save. There are no fees on deposits and withdrawals, and they offer higher interest rates than the big banks. You can find out more about Smart Savings at maplemoney.com/wealthsimple. Now let's chat with Robert. Hi, Rob. Welcome to the MapleMoney Show.
Hey, Tom. Thanks for having me on.
I'm glad to have you on. I loved your book, Wealthing Like Rabbits, and I know you've kind of taken that and turned this into going out and speaking and talking to a lot of colleges and universities.
Right.
So I wanted to kind of run through some of the things that you would tell the young people at these colleges and universities. First off, can you kind of tell us a little bit more about these talks that you've been doing?
Yeah, well, when I released Wealthing Like Rabbits way back in 2014, I didn't do any speaking on the messages of the book for about a year and a half. I was just focused on getting it out there and promoting the book. And I started to get inquiries from a couple of colleges and universities. Do you ever come and speak on the subject of financial literacy? And I thought that's great. What a great way to help spread the message and to get out and see other parts of the country. So when I started to do them, I really worked hard on developing a presentation that would speak to almost everyone. And one of the things I talk about first in the presentation is that how when we hear the word personal finance, everybody gets hung up on the word finance, and they start thinking about investing and real estate and cryptocurrency and rates of return and all the different acronyms. And it's a pretty dry and boring subject, where I argue that the most important part of personal finance is the personal part and making decisions that are right for you. And that can vary very differently from person to person and from situation to situation. And then I go on to contradict myself by saying that, even though that's true, there really are some fundamental rules. And God knows I hate that word, but foundations or principles of personal finance that really do apply to almost everyone. Now, how we apply them, how we integrate them into each of our lives could be really different from person to person and from situation to situation. But at the end of the day, those underlying principles usually apply. So that's kind of where I started.
Okay. Yeah, I find that too, that personal finance has become, or maybe always has been, but I've really noticed it. It's been kind of a tough word. I tend to just use the word money a lot more. People are interested in how to make more money, how to save money, but they don't want to get into finance because, you're right. That sounds like you need a degree.
It's funny when you talk about money or finance, you're almost looking for new words to describe it because you're saying the same thing over and over again, either in writing or in speaking.
Yeah.
We should work on that.
So let's kind of go through some of these things. First of all, what's sort of the most important someone, say they're in a college or university, what's sort of the most important thing you think that they need to know about their money?
Yeah, well, I start by talking about three principles, and I'll kind of touch on each one. And the first one I talk about is the need to stay out of what I call dumb, excessive debt. Now, I hope you're noticing I'm not saying to stay out of all debt, because I understand that a lot of students can't complete a post-secondary education in whatever career or occupation without taking on what I hope is some well-considered student debt. But that doesn't mean they need to be racking up excessive credit card debt while they're going to school, or to drive a new car while they're going to school, and that sort of thing. And anything they can do to, minimize that debt load while they're going to school is going to, decrease the amount of money they owe upon graduation, which will allow them to get off to a quicker start as they start to build their finances.
Okay. And what's the next one?
Yeah. And the second thing I talk about is the Joneses. And that section is actually called Screw the Joneses. And I talk a little bit about, how important it is for young people to make decisions that are right for them and their financial future, and without worrying about what anybody else thinks. And I think that's hard today. I think we're lying if anyone says they're completely blind to the keeping up with the Joneses syndrome, but sometimes it's out of control. And in an era of social media, when everybody's posting pictures of the great dinner they went out for last night, or the great party, or the vacation they went to, it becomes a lot harder. And you feel a little bit of pressure to keep up. But I've noticed, and I talk about this at the speeches, that nobody ever posts their credit card bill on their Facebook page.
And what's the third one? Then we'll kind of run back to all of them.
And the third one is that they need to be committed to starting a long-term savings plan as soon as reasonably possible. Now, of course, I understand that it's hard for most students to start saving for their future, their retirement, for their house or whatever, while they're still going to school. But I want to get that message in their head so that when they graduate and hopefully start earning an income, that they won't delay that savings plan by 5 or 10 or 15 years once they're out in the workforce. I want to kind of set that seed so that they'll start to think about that early. Those are the three things that I talk about.
Okay, so
and then it goes all over the page from there.
Of these three things, and I've touched on this in past episodes, this was when I was worst with my money, and I fail at all of those when I was in college. I had student loan debt, but not only did I have the debt, but I did such bright things with it as getting a new car stereo, and spending a lot of it. Like the first week, I wasn't used to having money. Like I didn't really have a job until I think a year before college. During, say, high school, I didn't have a job. So I wasn't used to sort of having to earn money and keep money. And then all of a sudden I had this student loan, and not long after that, I had a college credit card. So between these two things, I had a big problem with that.
And it's a really great point. One of the things that drives me crazy a little bit is when you read or you hear that millennials, to be honest, I hate the phrase, but it is that bucket list term to describe everybody, I guess, between the age of 30 and 40 now, because they're all getting older. Yeah. But anybody who describes, young people today as being disengaged or irresponsible or, entitled. When I always think back, you mentioned the car stereo, it made me smile, because the first thing I did when I got a credit card is I bought this monster Pioneer stereo, So
I think mine was Pioneer as well.
All generations have their thing. And I honestly don't believe that young people today are any less responsible than generations before them. We all made mistakes, and hopefully we learn from the mistakes, and hopefully we can give people that are younger today a little bit of advice so they can at least avoid or reduce the mistakes that they make.
For sure. And going back to then, like I wish I had someone like you talking to me then. If I was actually willing to listen, I don't know at the time. Like, it's hard to think back to then. Like I often say, I wish there was sort of a personal finance class in high school even, but you still have to be willing to take it, assuming it's not mandatory, and actually care. So I'm not sure how. Maybe you've got some ideas on how you reach out to these younger people and sort of really make them notice that.
Well, the part on staying out of debt, I talk about credit cards and student credit cards a lot. And true story, one of the reasons I decided to write Wealthing Like Rabbits, it's actually in the book, is the day I drove my own daughter, Jennifer, to school at her first day of university. And she went to York, so it's not far from where we are. And the day we got there, we headed over to their student center to grab some lunch. And there were 4 separate banks set up in the lobby of the student center handing out student credit card applications. When I say handing them out, Tom, they were actually going out in the crowd and bringing the students back to the table, encouraging them to sit down and fill out applications for student credit cards. And if they did, they got a T-shirt. And another one was handing out Frisbees. And I thought, you know what, that's just wrong. That's not the way to go about it. And it's not that I'm anti-student credit card. I'm really not. I just think the students have a right to be better informed about how they actually work, so then they can make better decisions about choosing to use them. And I promise you that education piece isn't happening at orientation week when they're getting their Frisbees in the school lobby. So a large part of my presentation is it's a little bit of scared straight. I walk them through how a credit card calculates interest. I walk them through minimum payments and just how much interest you would pay. I walk them through cash advance. The fact they start paying interest plus the fees on the interest as soon as the money comes out of the machine. And I go through about 5 or 6 different things that's right in your credit card agreement, which no one on earth has ever read. and to let them know just how much money they're subjecting themselves to. And I talk about how we talk about our credit cards. When we go out for dinner, we say we paid for dinner with our credit card, or we paid for the gas we put in our truck with our credit card. Tom, when you use your credit card, you're not paying for anything. Credit card provider is paying for you, but what you're doing is actually called borrowing, and now you're in debt. And I crack a joke about someone going to Best Buy to buy a new big screen TV, and I run through a little mock where they go through the cashier and they pay for the TV, and the cashier says, "Hey, will you be paying for your big screen TV with cash or debit? Or will you be taking out a crippling high interest loan with your credit card because deep down in, you can't afford the TV?" And it's kind of funny. It gets some laughs, but they start thinking, because you know what? About half the time, that's exactly what is happening.
Yeah. If with my credit card specifically in college, if it had been a bigger limit, I would have got myself in a lot of trouble. I think the limit was low. It was probably under $1,000. I don't quite remember, but it was lower. But I just considered it like free money. It was like, oh yeah, I can afford that car stereo or a TV or something because I have the limit for it. So unfortunately, yeah, that bill does come.
Yeah. So that whole credit card piece is a little bit of scared straight. Talk a little bit about rewards programs, and I caution them not to be buying anything to get the rewards, because chances are it's not good value. Make your spending decisions based on what you really need and want, and have a budget for it. If you get a couple of extra points for it on the side, well, that's fine. But if it's part of the spending decision, I would caution them against that.
Yeah. That I didn't even have a rewards card at the time, but certainly I can see that being a sort of this additional motivator. It's like, oh, I'm going to get 1% back in points, so why not spend it?
And it's interesting. I had been doing the presentation for about 6 months, and I was speaking at a school here in Ontario in Belleville, Loyalist College, and I got talking to the organizers afterwards, and they said, "Rob, why don't you tell them about payday loan places?" And I said, "What, do students use a lot of payday loan places?" And they're like, "Oh my God, they're there all the time. Every check they get." And it was complete. So this is a learning experience for me as well. And I went, wow, I didn't know that. And I got talking to some students, and now I also talk about the payday loans and just how much they'll charge you if you're in a habit of rotating for them. And I'm not nice to them at all. I'm pretty gentle with the credit card people. I'm not with the payday loan places.
Yeah, I agree. You can use the credit card like a tool, but you can't. The payday loans, you just get nailed with so much in fees right off the bat that there's no upside to that at all.
I let them know that if you use your credit card properly and responsibly, and that means deciding not to use it at all sometimes, but it can be a very valuable tool. It's hard to buy stuff online without a credit card these days, and it helps them establish and build a credit rating. Those are all good things used responsibly. You can't make any of those arguments for a payday loan place.
Exactly. I agree completely. Let's head over to the second thing. That was keeping up with the Joneses, right?
That's actually the third thing I talked about, but I went out of order.
Oh, okay. So which was the real second one then?
The real second one is to encourage them to develop a long-term savings plan. And I don't say retirement because it might not be for retirement. And when you're talking to a bunch of 20-year-olds, retirement is forever away. And I was no different when I was 20, so I get that. But I do want them to start thinking about long-term. And as I said before, I do understand that it's, nearly impossible for most post-secondary students to save money while they're going to school. There might be some people out there that are working full-time and can do that. I have a couple come up to me later. The people that are good with their money, they come to the money presentations.
Yeah, that's my concern. Yeah, it's hard to get them to care sometimes. Unfortunately, it seems we all have to make mistakes before we totally catch on how this all works.
But I do walk them through a little bit about how important it is to start a savings plan, is what I call as soon as reasonably possible. Mm-hmm. And then we walk through some really corny and cheesy compound interest examples just to demonstrate how important it is to start saving earlier and how much more money you can generate with an additional 5 or 10 years. And I make the point, and it's a true point because we see this all the time. I say, a lot of Canadian adults today that are, 40 and 50 years of age have no savings or virtually no savings. And it's not that they're bad people. It's just that there's always something else to deal with. They get out of college and university and they've got student debt to pay for. Well, I understand that. Then after paying off their student debt, they decide they want to have their first real car. That doesn't even need to be a new car. Maybe it's a used Honda Civic or something like that, but they need to borrow the money to do that. And then a girlfriend or a boyfriend comes along and they start talking about a wedding, and that costs money too. And then once they're married, they got to buy a house, and Lord knows that costs a lot of money. Then kids come along, and then the Honda Civic's not doing it anymore. So now you need a new minivan, and then there's hockey, and then there's ballet, and then there's swim lesson. And all of a sudden they wake up and they're 43 years of age and they've saved no money. That's not a criticism. That happens all the time, and it's tough. But the earlier in life you commit to and I'll walk them through the whole pay yourself first system, a pay yourself first type of savings plan, the easier it is to commit to that and the less you'll miss the money. And I give them some examples about, if the price of coffee went up at Tim Hortons tomorrow, the country would collectively scream, but I promise you the drive-through lineups wouldn't go down because people would adapt to that new reality. Mm-hmm. And the best example is, and I forget who I stole this from, but the best example is the federal government when they collect their taxes off your paycheck. They don't wait till the end of the year to collect their taxes. The country would go broke, but they insist on getting their taxes up front. They'll settle up with you at the end of the year, but they're going to get their taxes up front. And, that's pay yourself first. It should be pay yourself second for the rest of us. And welcome to those examples, and they start to go, oh, yeah, I see what it means. So really try to set that message of saving and the power of interest and the power of the longer time frame in their mind while they're still in school. And I give them the gears a little bit. And I say, one of the things you can do to start a savings plan as soon as you can is to stay out of what I was just talking about, dumb, stupid, excessive consumer debt. So I kind of tie those two together.
And maybe it's just because I'm a money nerd, but it seems like nowadays saving and investing can be a little bit sexier with like apps like there's robo advisors and peer-to-peer lending, yeah. And the round up your purchases into savings. Like there's a lot of, say, millennial friendly ways to put money away now.
Yeah, and that whole investing nerd thing, I don't talk to them about investing at all because I really believe I want them to think about those foundational habits that will get them set up so that someday they'll have some money to invest, right? But almost every time I'll finish the speech and I'll ask for questions. Within the first two questions, someone will ask me, what do you think about investing in? And 2 years ago, everybody wanted to invest in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Nobody's investing in Bitcoin. Nobody asks me about Bitcoin anymore.
It's all marijuana now.
Yeah, now they want to get rich in marijuana. I go, you know what? Use some marijuana for a while, then get rich on it. You're in college. Relax.
Yeah.
There are obviously a few students that want to talk investing on the side, and I'm okay with that. But the essence of the presentation is to really get some strong foundational personal finance habits, and we'll talk about investing later. The analogy I use is, there's no use in talking about which piece of cardio equipment you're going to use when you go to the gym if you're not, in fact, going to the gym and you're going to Kentucky Fried Chicken for dinner 3 nights a week. Let's get the foundations in place first.
Yeah, fair enough. I think one of the things that probably would have gotten me interested in saving at a younger age, because obviously I wasn't saving either. I had friends that probably were saving, or maybe they were doing it all in debt, but they'd go on trips. It was pretty common in college to go on trips. I did not, because at that point I had no money.
Yeah. I went to Europe for the first time 2 years ago. I was 53. And I'm like, you've never been to Europe? Nope. I had other priorities. I had other things I wanted to do with my money.
Yeah, I'm still looking forward to getting out of North America myself. So maybe it'll take me into my 50s as well.
Fair enough.
Yeah. But yeah, the idea, something a little more interesting like that. Like you said, people aren't really looking to invest at that age, but the idea of saving up for maybe it is a car or a trip or something, just to get that habit of saving towards
the habit established. Exactly.
Okay. So now we can go to the third one, which was keeping up with the Joneses.
Screw the Joneses.
Yeah. This is a great one because I think you mentioned actually that everyone is kind of falls for this to some degree, even if it's not truly your neighbor. Maybe it's just a television ad or something. Something's going to sort of make you envious of having something, and that leads to spending, right?
Yeah. And I start by actually telling the history of that phrase, keeping up with the Joneses. what a lot of people don't know, certainly not people in their 20s, that was actually the name of a comic strip that ran in American newspaper starting in 1915, and the comic strip ran until 1937. And the strip poked fun at a couple named Mr. and Mrs. McGinnis, who were always buying things they didn't need to impress their wealthier neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Jones. And the comic strip ended in 1935, but for some strange reason, the phrase stuck and been with us ever since. And I actually show an example. One of the comic strips from it was from 1917. So when I started showing it, it was exactly 100 years old. And Mr. and Mrs. McGinnis had just bought themselves their brand new phonograph, a record player. And Mrs. Jones says, well, that's nice. You own a new phonograph. And Mr. McGinnis says, no, I don't own the phonograph. I've got 108 more payments to make before I own the phonograph. And that leads me to talking about, how we've become so comfortable in making payments for things that we want to have as opposed to saving for things we have. And with so much credit and credit cards, tying it back to the credit card speech earlier, it's become so easy for people to get things that they don't really own because they haven't paid for them yet. And that when you see people with newer cars or shiny clothes or whatever it happens to be, don't assume that they're in better shape than you are financially. Looks and appearances can be incredibly deceiving. And I kind of talk a little bit about making decisions that are right for them and not worrying about what anybody else thinks and not worrying about what their social media feed thinks. And that kind of message resonates well as well.
Yeah, and a great book for that, other than yours, of course, is The Millionaire Next Door. Just that idea that like you said, the person that you assume is rich probably isn't. They're the ones that have a lot of debt, and the person that lives within their means is probably the one doing better off.
And don't assume that buying something new and shiny is going to make you happy. That thing that was new and shiny last week won't be new and shiny 6 months from now. It won't have anywhere near the value, either real or perceived value it did when you bought it. But that debt is still very real, and that could make you even more unhappy. So try to keep those things in perspective.
Yeah, it's a bad direction to go in where you're building up your debt. Meanwhile, everything you bought is depreciating. And the whole Marie Kondo thing is a big thing right now. Does it spark joy? There's all sorts of stuff in my house that I bought in the past that does not spark joy. So you kind of get weighed down by all that, like not just the debt itself, but all this stuff you bought.
And the other thing I ask them to consider is if you think the debt over the long term could be a stressful experience for you, consider the happiness or the pride that can be driven when you buy something that you've really wanted and you've done the work and you've saved for it, so you're not in debt. So you've worked toward a goal and then you've accomplished it. That's a nice feeling, and I won't want them to lose track of that either.
Yeah, then just the act of saving means you're taking that time to find that item that you actually want. It's not a impulse purchase on the credit card.
Sure.
Yeah. So this has been great. Can you let everyone know where they can find you?
Well, you can always find me on Twitter where I might be saying something personal finance related, and I might be saying something silly and complete banality too. You can find me on Twitter at Wealthing Rabbit. And if anybody's interested in my book, you can find it at Chapters Indigo across the country or on Amazon as well.
And what's your website address?
WealthingLikeRabbits.com.
Great. Thanks for being on the show.
Tom, thanks for having me. It's a lot of fun.
Thanks to Rob for sharing his insight from talking with young adults at various colleges and universities. And thanks to you for listening. I really appreciate it. You can find show notes for this episode at MapleMoney.com/Robert Brown. We're still continuing the Maple Money 10th anniversary giveaway throughout February. We'll be handing out 10 Amazon.ca gift cards worth $100 each. Subscribing to the show is one of the many ways to get additional entries, so you already have a head start. You can enter at MapleMoney.com/giveaway. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you here next week.